Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is beginning of week 4 for the October Business of Wine course 2018. And we're kind of wrapping up on production. And so where we're going to go to in today's class is kind of the interface between production and a single wine and managing multiple wines. At this point in time, I very much like to review the TTB site because there's so much information there. I was just telling Stephen that we've got a intercollegiate wine business competition going on, and we've got 14 teams from 6 universities, literally all corners of the U.S. And one of the things they were asked to do is to create a winery name, name the wine they're going to make, which is a $25 red blend, and they've got to design the label, come up with the concept, what goes on the front label, the back label. And so one of the resources that they had available, which several of the teams ignored, is that on the TTB site, there's everything you need to know about wine labeling. And what kind of permits, what is a certificate of label approval, which is the process when you get your wine designed, sending it in, getting the federal approval for that. What grape names can be used or not. And then what is it, if you claim to be organic, what do you have to do? And on and on and on. So there's all sorts of very rich stuff here. Even a memorandum of understanding between the TTB and the Agricultural Marketing Service. This is an agreement on coordination of organic labeling. Personalized labels, colas, as we already said, sample wine labels. Let's say that you're getting bulk wines. We gave you that sheet with the mock blending wine labels. There's actually stuff that needs to be there if you're exchanging wines, especially across state lines. So anyways, so don't forget this site. Anybody that needs deeper understanding of what kind of permits, what kind of certifications or requirements, and just a wealth of information, okay? So don't forget about that, y'all. All right, so what we're going to talk today about is sort of the intro, that space between production and having finished goods and starting to get it into the market and how to price things and that kind of stuff. So distribution can be considered the point of getting a product from the point of production to the point of sale. And it could be really simple. There are really small wineries. They may have a little area right in their own winery where they've gotten it permitted as an in-bond storage facility, or the whole facility might be done. And distribution might be just, on Saturday morning, whoever's responsible in the tasting room goes over, writes something down. You usually want to record these things, pulls cases out of there and wheels it over to the tasting room. Might even be in the same facility, right? So that's actually how that wine is distributed. But it also could be very complex with involving getting everything prepared at the winery, getting it to a consolidator and freight forwarder, because you're going to an export market. And then you've got to have all your ducks in a row for your export permit and any certification, any paperwork that's required by the shipping company, and all the way to the receiving point, the destination. And very often you need a certificate of origin and different lab analyses and that kind of stuff. and then it's received in the port of entry. You've got to clear customs, you've got all that paperwork. Sometimes you have to bribe people, seriously. And then it's got to be received, transported to a warehouse, or if it's a direct import thing, it might go directly to a hotel or store or something, and whatever. So it can be really simple or really complex, but that's what we're going to start to talk about, okay? And so distribution is, when we get to the 4 P's of marketing, it is the P called place. So where is the sale going to take place, and how do you get it there, right? So it's making the product or service available for the consumer or the business. And commonly the 3-tier system: a producer sells to a wholesaler, who sells to a store. And the best way to think about this, and I'll say it several times because it bears repeating, it's really 3 levels of licensing. If you have a licensed producer, then they want to sell out of state. They almost invariably have to sell to a licensed wholesaler or distributor who has to maintain their facilities, their permits and licensing, and they'll have to conform and have compliance to state, federal, and often city requirements. And then they have to, whatever that state or region or city or locality is, they'll probably have to be in trucks that are licensed and registered, with drivers who are bonded and insured, who then make the delivery to the stores and restaurants. And then, so level 1 is being licensed as a producer, and that you're in storing the wine. The second is to a licensed distributor. And then the 3rd tier is selling to a licensed retail, restaurant, hotel, wine bar. So that's the 3 tiers. And we're going to talk about those in more detail, but that's, and again, it might be really complex, or it could be just you're wheeling it over to your tasting room and kind of anywhere in between. All right. And so in that case, the tasting room, you're taking tax paid wine, and then you're putting it at the point of sale. Okay. So that's that. Any questions about that, Steve? That all makes sense? Yay. And that gets us to what's called sales channel options. And in a few minutes, we're going to start talking about creating, marketing, and selling a portfolio of wines rather than just a focus on one wine, which we've been doing up to this point. So when we talk about sales channels, this is the route that gets a product to a point of sale, and it's broken down roughly into direct-to-consumer sales. And how direct-to-consumer sales look at your tasting room, which might be at your winery. It might be in actually, a winery space that's been legally sort of cordoned off, or can hold its own permit and license, or it might be a separate building on the same site. In many states, you can sometimes have up to 5 remote tasting rooms. So you can open one in a more commercial setting. You'll see this over and over again in the wine country now. If you go to Sonoma Square, if you go to Paso Robles, if you go to Napa, you will see off-site tasting rooms, remote tasting rooms. Because, and this is an important distinction, because really people who are, especially the ones that are often remote areas, they may have a fairly open permit for tastings and receiving visitors, which is a big distinction. New permits in a lot of areas only allow visits by appointment only. If you really want to expand your direct-to-consumer tasting room sales, you want an open permit, no restriction like requires an appointment. But a lot of tasting rooms will find, well, you know, it's really nice. It's a beautiful drive, but people just don't seem to want to make that drive or take that risk to drink and drive and whatever. So they'll go ahead and they'll have their tasting room at the winery and then possibly open a second or a third. And in some cases, in the state of Georgia, Chateau Elan Winery had a tasting room at the property. They had a tasting room associated with a retail operation in Atlanta. They had a tasting room at Hartsfield International Airport, which was a really smart idea. And that's the first time I've actually ever seen a wine company take a position in an airport, and we're talking about 30 years ago. And so they sold all sorts of Georgia souvenirs, Chateau Elan wines, and all these kind of things, and had a little tasting bar. So cellar door sales. This is, especially for MW students, WSET, this is a little bit more of a European model, but it's starting to get picked up in the US. And it's also a big thing in Australia. And you've got a winery, but you're selling direct to consumers, usually in minimum case quantities, and somebody phones in an order or emails an order, and that's it. And the winery says, great, come pick it up. And you're not really going there for the tasting room or that kind of stuff. It can be direct billed to the client with a credit card, and they pick it up at the winery. So they call this cellar door sales. So you may run into that terminology every now and then, all right? But it's just, and you can have a tasting room that's doing cellar door sales and just say, yeah, stop by, we'll have your wine waiting for you, just stop by the tasting room and pick it up. So that's why it's kind of a gray area, but it's just a direct to consumer. Usually a transaction it can be rung up in the tasting room or run by credit card, and then the client just comes and picks it up. But especially in Europe, where tasting rooms are a pretty novel concept still in some regions, especially the more remote areas, they don't even have a tasting room, so it's just you can phone in or email an order and pick it up. Another area of direct to consumer is your website and your shopping cart in store. Very little wine is usually sold that way. There are some always exceptions to this, but basically your website with the shopping cart, you're constantly trying to induce the customer to actually join the wine club, all right? And then the wine club is a membership kind of a thing, and that whether it's paid or not, it's something somebody signs up for, and certain agreements of receiving certain amounts of shipments over time, okay? Oh, and I left off mailing list. Mailing list is when you have it's usually a very highly allocated, scarce, or you've given the idea of scarcity, you're on the mailing list. When the wine is released, you are shipped whatever your allocation is, whether it's 1 bottle or 5 cases or whatever. And in the mailing list model, you're either on the list or off the list. If you are on the list, you're agreeing to receive the wine when it's released. You want it, and you don't want a disruption in it. So to really work, a mailing list also has to have a waiting list so that you can have the threat. If you ever don't take your shipment, which you're free to do, you're free to decline it, but be advised that you may be knocked off the list if you don't take it. And so this is how to deal with vintages that maybe were problematic, or why 1 year you didn't quite get that high rating from Parker or whatever. Okay, so the mailing list, and it's also it's the grand prize. A really strong mailing list wine is the most profitable thing you can do. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, sort of the next level of sales channel, a winery in virtually every state, I don't know of a state where you can't do this, you can also hold a wholesaler's license only for this state. Now, you can't do that in any other state because of tied house laws and regulations against it in the three-tier system. But in your state of production, you can have a wholesaler's license and sell directly to a licensee, a restaurant, a store, a wine bar, hotel, etc. Okay. Do not think for a minute you're cutting out the middleman. You are becoming the middleman. You are now responsible. For a lot of people, they think, oh, this will be great. You know, I can send a few cases over here and here and here. You're getting yourself into a world of new duties and responsibilities, because you have to take the orders, and no problem, we'll get you 5 cases. All right, and then you've got to invoice them. In many states, it's COD. Other times you can give terms, but now you're doing billing and invoicing, which also means that later on you're doing collections and running after these friggin' people to pay you. So you've got, you know, all the accounts receivable that you've got to manage. You've got to manage getting the wine to the destination, or you're going to just schlep it out in your SUV or an employee's truck, or ship it, or how are you getting it to that account? So you're now in the delivery business. And then how are you going to service the account? Who's going to service the account? How are you going to get the repeat order? Because the distributors have their salespeople out in these stores and restaurants, you know, every week, taking orders, looking at the inventories, introducing new products. And you may have made a sale to a restaurant, but now you got to service it. You've got to support it. What are you going to do that? If it's a store, do you have something to build a display or not? Does it just sit there on the shelf and you hope somebody comes along and picks it up? Okay. So that's direct to account. Any questions on that? And then the 3-tier system, the system we love to hate. You've got thousands and thousands of producers, and you've got millions and millions of consumers, and somewhere right in that is distributors. And the distributors are representing all these wineries and imports and whatever. A typical distributor today can easily have 5,000 to 7,000 products in their portfolio, okay? A lot of people who are in the wine business and in production don't even try to understand their business. They just bitch and complain. And there's a lot to bitch and complain about, but critically thinking, there's a lot of services and there are a lot of advantages that these distributors provide, and a lot of really smart, talented people. So please don't jump to the conclusion it's good versus evil or something like that. And in many states, it's the only way to do business, all right? And so basically what you then have is there's usually 2 divisions. If you're selling to stores where somebody buys the wine and then it's intended to be consumed off the premises, that's called the off-premise market. And then you've got restaurants and hotels and bars and wine bars and so on. And that's where you open the bottle and it's for consumption on the premises. So in wine business lingo, you've got off-premise and on-premise licensees, usually 2 divisions. And then those are even further broken down into class of trade and whether they're large chains or individual units and that kind of stuff, okay? So that's the 3-tier system. Any questions on that? And export sales. Export sales is all of the 3-tier system with a few added steps thrown in dependent on the company or the country. First of all, the country of origin of where the wines are coming from, and then the destination country. and they can be fairly open and simple, or they can be just an absolute impossible pain in the neck. So those are sort of their own entity and world. And that's where going to the TTB site, you can actually see kind of requirements. You can see by country. When formulating where is my product going to go, where am I going to sell it, the kind of things you start looking at in your critical thinking or your SWOT analysis, which we're going to get to real shortly, is what are the barriers to trade? How expensive are wines? What are the duties and taxes? How much paperwork's involved? Are there, it used to be literally you couldn't do business in China unless you had somebody who could represent you for bribing customs officials. Now that's all pretty much gone away, but that was a standard part of doing the business. If you want to go to a Norwegian country, you're probably going to run into, I'm sorry, a Scandinavian country, you're going to run into monopolies that used to be what was required for doing business in Canada as well, but that's breaking up. And so a monopoly is where a government entity is actually running the licensed, controlled substance sale, distribution and sales in a state or a country. So it still exists in Pennsylvania, in Utah. It's more or less still part of the process in different provinces of Canada, but differs by province. And then there are countries like Finland and Norway and so on where they're very large bureaucratic entities and political entities that dictate any wine that goes into the market, okay? So the other thing is you've got to compare. So if you're producing wine in France and looking at the US as a market, you've got to look at your restraints to trade. You're also going to see if there are marketing dollars and money is available to help you in your exports, even subsidies sometimes. But you can get money from agricultural organizations, from state, from feds. France has SOPEXA, which are Wines and Foods of France. Spain has an entity. You've got the Australian Wine Bureau and those kind of things. So all that's part of export. And so just as a real quick example, right now, taxes for shipping wine to China are about 27% of the value of your goods. And then there's an additional duty that's put on top of that. And so everybody pays the 27%, but in terms of the duty for US wines, the duty's now over 40%. So you take that value and add an additional, so if you got a $10 bottle of wine, it's $14 a bottle, and plus the 27%. So it's almost a total of 68, and this is what happens when you get into trade wars. If you're looking at that as a viable export market, you need to understand where we're paying that 41%, Chile is zero. They've got a strong trade agreement. They've got a favored status, and Australia's on its fast track. And if it's not zero, it's close to it. There was a blip because they got into a technology war with China, and China retaliated, and I'm not sure of the status of that, but that's what you look for that option. Okay, any questions about that? And we're going to go through all these in detail. This is your overview. So here's where we are in the course, because every now and then I want to make sure that you remember the supply chain and value chain. And let me see, hang on a second, I've got to. So Chile and Australia and everybody pays the 27%, and then there's that additional amount that that US has to pay 41%, in Australia and in Chile and other countries are at 0. France is somewhere in between, but China is so important for France. I mean, literally, the whole economy of the country kind of depends on it, if you take how important wine is to their economy. And so I think they're also on a step down over time also, and they'll be expected to be at 0%. So let me know if that didn't answer your question, Tina. All right. So we're kind of transitioning from here and into here. And again, we still want to be looking at all the stakeholder perspectives from production or marketing, sales, and finance. All right. And this is where we're going. And then again, the route to the market from the producer and then to various wholesale distributors, direct to account, custom crush, or are you just going direct to the tasting room, wine club, winery site, or are you going through account direct or distributor to on or off premise? Okay. All right. So now we're going to talk about actually transitioning from a critical thinking, which I hope you all are getting and getting the value of this, and breaking it down even further and it's called SWOT analysis. Very simply, strengths and weaknesses, the S and W of SWOT, are internal. It could be internal for a person, it could be internal for a company, but it's basically taking stock of the things that you do well or assets that you have that you could consider strengths. And then making a list of what you don't have, what resources you might require, what you're not good at, and that's the weakness, again, either individually or for a company. And so the tendency is we all focus more on the weak or on the strengths and tend to downplay our weaknesses. But what that does is that kind of buries things that might be a risk or something that need to be addressed. So for example, one of my weaknesses is accounting and paperwork and whatever. Okay, great. I really need to have a really good accountant. I need to address that weakness and then compensate for it. And then actually, if I address it, I can now move that out of the weakness and say, well, one of our strengths is we've got a really great person to do this, or we've outsourced it to a company that will do this. And so that weakness has become a strength, right? So the weakness gives you that list of things that you need to work on, and you should prioritize it as well, all right? You may be looking at a market opportunity, say, okay, well, the market opportunity is, let's say, to sell a wine to a big national restaurant chain that has shown an interest, but your weakness is you're not in all 50 states and they're demanding that you be in all 50 states. So you would really need to address that weakness in your plan to turn it into here. So here's the opportunity. This restaurant chain says, we'd like to serve your wine by the glass and put you into 200 restaurants. Awesome. So look at your strengths and weakness and you find out, well, they're in 50 states and we're not. Can we do that? All right. And then once we do that, if we take advantage of the opportunity and take that weakness, turn it into a strength, and now we're in all 50 states, or maybe you already were, what if they drop you? In our intercollegiate wine business plan, two of the judges have noticed somebody on this team has somebody whose dad or family owns a certain restaurant chain because they put all their eggs into a distribution, a market opportunity of selling wine to this large chain of restaurants. But if you get dropped or that goes out of business, you're kind of dead. Here's another way of looking at this. A lot of people go into Costco, see their pricing, see if you can talk to somebody there. And what you're going to find is they've got a very low margin, a very low markup for their product. They buy huge quantities. If you're a vendor, if you're selling, okay, so you're making the sale and you're supplying, and you go in and you get this, you got to say, okay, well, wow, this is a great opportunity to sell a lot of wine really quick. All right, now are we in the markets that need to be serviced? Do we have the distribution to fulfill on that kind of thing? Do we have enough production, or can we ramp up our production, or how do we handle that in the strengths and weaknesses? And the threats actually are several. You get your wine in Costco, they don't mark it up as much, meaning they're lower priced than the competitors. The restaurants might drop you. If you're at restaurants in that market, they say, oh, they're in Costco now. I look stupid, because literally the restaurant probably can't buy it as inexpensively as Costco sells it for, because of their markup, and also because of discounts and that kind of stuff. So that's a threat. You're a threat to yourself in the market because you made that placement. Retailers are going to be really reticent to even carry your wines, might delist it, kick you off the shelves. And once you lose these listings, these are the hardest to reclaim. There's plenty of threats out there, competitive threats, to take your place, all right? And then the worst scenario of all, it is very well known and very well documented that Costco will, even if your wine's selling like crazy, they want something new, they want to refresh their offering, they drop you, say, thank you very much, you know, it's been fun doing business with you. And now the restaurants don't like you, the retailers don't like you. You've created negative goodwill, you've created bad will, and that's a big, big threat. Okay, so that's what SWOT analysis is. And when you're getting ready to go to market, you've got to look at, you know, what is this market opportunity? Can you do it? And what's positive and negative, you know, about that opportunity? What's your cost of finished goods? What's the cost of doing business through that channel? Where is your product going to be positioned and priced? All right, which is part of positioning. What kind of profit margin do you have for yourself, and also through the gatekeepers in the sales channel? What's the potential volume of what you're going to have in this market, in this channel? And then what's your strategy? All right, and you've got the channel strategy, you've got legal permits, those kind of things, story and messaging, because you've got to get it all the way through. Okay, so there you go. We'll be talking a lot about SWOT analysis and these kind of elements. Any questions on this? Roger that. Okay, compliance. You can Google wine compliance and learn a ton about it. Simply put, compliance is conforming to any requirements, international, federal, state, local, city, block organization, or whatever, that you have all the permits, everything conforms to the label regulations, etc. So wine labels and packaging have to be approved. You have to find out who they have to be approved by, and what might be legal in one market might not be legal in another. And this also goes for states, but that's all pretty much standardized now. Then you need the compliance is also licenses and permits to be in compliance in production and producing and selling wine. Wine shipping licenses for each destination state, and label approvals at the state level, those kind of things. And then keeping all the paperwork, and it is enormous. Some people just get buried by this stuff. So there is a very vibrant business so that you can outsource your compliance. If you're a large winery, it's going to be a very busy and often very large division of your company. Okay, so that's the world of compliance and it really starts at the very beginning and goes to the very end. But I thought this would be a kind of a good place to get a little bit more in depth. Any questions about compliance and legal stuff? Cool. All right. And then there's all sorts of information available. So let's say that you wanted to do business in a certain state, and you can see that these are dollars per gallon of excise tax. And also you can see that if it's a dollar per gallon tax base, then the more expensive your wine is, the less that this is an issue. If you're $2 chuck, or if you're a value priced wine, and we're even talking in the $10 to $20 range, you know, you've got 2.38 gallons in a case of wine, and if you're, you know, over $2 a gallon, that impacts your selling price in that market pretty significantly. And then you can see New York is 30 cents a gallon. So big differences. And then you've got Utah, Wyoming, Pennsylvania, you've got your control states that are kind of called out here also, all right? So then the other thing is a value added tax, VAT, or a tax base using the value that if it's $100 that a value for your case of wine that you're sending, and it's a 10% tax, you're paying $10. And if it's a $1,000 a case product, you're paying 10 times that amount. Okay, so that's how the different taxes work, and that information's you know, pretty easily available. All right. So here's some examples. If you're going direct to account, you've got a licensed production facility, and then that facility has to obtain an in-state wholesale license. So I think there was a question, and I said, oh, I've got to go back and find the question. A question about this. Why is this not a illegal under tied house laws and under 3-tier distribution? It's an exception, and it's limited only to sales in state. All right, so that's what and the producer has all the roles and responsibility of the distributor: sales, invoicing, collection, support, marketing, delivery, etc. All right, compliance for wine clubs. An awful lot of wine clubs use a separate company, a specialist, and there are dozens of them now. And these companies, you outsource all the issues around getting the licensing, getting registered, and being able to do business in the states where you can do direct shipments and that kind of stuff. So each state is different, and what their requirements are, the fees, and what you're allowed to ship, how often, those kind of things. And then you've got reporting and so forth. So this can be handled in-house with somebody, and this is a really big career opportunity for a lot of people who understand this, because more and more even sort of relatively small wineries, and certainly as scale goes up, this becomes more important, want to do all of this in-house rather than paying a fee to have outsource it and have another company do it. So people who know this, the compliance maze that you have to go through, and that know how to set up and negotiate shipping rates and whatever, those people are actually very high demand for people with that job skill and so forth. So in strengths, personal strengths and weaknesses, people who know this and have these strengths are in high demand. All right, and then if you have a tasting room, you're going to have all sorts of local permits, licenses, zoning, and are you allowed to taste and sell? Can you charge for the tastings? What else can you sell? Can you do events? Can you do weddings? Those kind of things. And so you need to make sure that you're appropriately permitted and in compliance with all levels of laws. Okay. Quick word about domestic and export monopolies. All right, Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board. Anybody that needs, you can just look these up. Independent government agency that runs the whole beverage alcohol industry, and complete control of it. So to make a sale into Pennsylvania, you've got to go through the Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board. Like I say, you know, in Canada, this was, every province had their own LCB. LCBO is Liquor Control Board of Ontario. They've got one in every province. I still think the most back, and you can correct me if you know, Steve, I think Quebec still has kind of sort of the most control. Isn't that correct? And Ontario's the most open?
Well, I don't know about that. Ontario's pretty closed in that way. It's
pretty rigid still.
A little bit. Alberta's gone almost private.
Right. Yeah, with stores, with restaurants, and so there's in Alberta you've got oversight and taxation. All of this is so that people can get their taxes, right? They can get their profits and their taxes in their control. So, and that's why distributors wield so much power, because they have been historically, since Prohibition. Remember, the whole system we've got now was started basically by the people who were the criminals, you know, during Prohibition. They had the production, they had the distribution, they had the muscle, they had the guns, and they had the control. And so it got set up so it's this fragmented, fractured mess of stuff. And the one thing that's going to ensure that a distributor keeps control in a state is the threat that, yeah, but if you open up, there's going to be ways people can avoid paying taxes, right? So this whole system is just follow the money, and you can then understand why they do this. Now in Finland, it's a really, really tight monopoly, and it goes through the board, and the only way to sell it is through their stores and so forth. And if you have a restaurant, you've got a deal and you've got to work with them, and there's no way around it, okay? So, and this is kind of the fascinating thing. So Alko in Finland, 350 stores and 60 pickup points. So you can phone or email orders in and pick them up. And that's the only way you can buy any alcoholic beverage in Finland with anything more than 4.7% alcohol. And then they've got a web shop, so they are the wine club, and that there's 5,000 products available through that, and they've got 2,500 skilled. Can you guess who wrote this? It was Alko. And so they know how to pair food and drink and can help you and whatever. So they're actually, a lot of these organizations are under a lot of fire for being inefficient, being filled with graft and bribes and corruption and so forth. So they're marketing themselves and trying to stay in the most positive light possible. Okay. All right. We're going to get into wine pricing and wine pricing terms. MSRP is often a fantasy price. There are certain limitations to your fantasy. If you go buy blinds and you don't get at least 30 or 40% off, you're just kind of stupid, because nobody sells the blinds for your windows at full MSRP. It's just a fantasy price so that you can discount it heavily. And the same goes for wine. You go in and there will be, the website will have an MSRP, but join the wine club, you get 25% off. Go into a store and you find it's cheaper in a store in Texas than it is in the tasting room of the winery. And part of that is because the winery, number one, they're trying to maximize profitability. They're working on a low volume, usually in a tasting room, but also they want people to have an inducement to buy the wine when they go home. And if you buy it for $15 in the tasting room at your favorite trip, wherever it is in the US or the world, and then you go back and, oh, wow, here's that wine we loved. It's cheaper here than it was in the tasting room. Now, they might be kind of pissed off they bought 5 cases, but that does happen. So this is just a fantasy price. There are wineries that create an MSRP that's so unrealistic, they actually get fined for it. So there are articles you can actually do a search that shows, because you can go out and find, and if anybody finds a huge discrepancy between an MSRP and an actual selling or a discounted price, post it on the Facebook. We found wines that have a stated MSRP of over $20 that sell every day, everywhere for $8.99. And these are the kind of excesses that also could land you in legal trouble. Okay, so it's just an inflated price that nobody ever would buy the wine for. ASP is actually the average selling price or actual selling price, kind of synonymous. And that's what does the wine sell for day to day. And then discounted or sale price would be any further reduction that's temporary. And if it's not temporary, then it becomes the new ASP. And this is something this is a big risk that a lot of wineries needed to move stock or were upping their production. So they said, okay, well, we're going to run a big national campaign and we're going to discount the price of our wine. And they go from $15 to $12 or from $11.99 to $9.99. And then once consumers see that price and get used to buying it for that price, when they try to raise their price, it comes and bites them in the butt. So pricing is a really, really serious part of this. And how are you going to maintain pricing and discounting? Now, how this relates to your cost of goods calculator. Remember your gross margin. Your gross margin is that vector between your selling price of the winery and your cost to actually produce that wine, all right? And inside of that is your bank for discounting. That is your bank. You've got to pay salaries, you've got to pay your overhead, you've got to pay for your tasting facilities if that's part of the general fund. But that's basically your bank. And so you've got to be really careful about what you're establishing as your MSRP, what you're establishing as your average selling price, and then be really, really careful with your discounting and sales. All right, so there's an example of it. Everyday price is $16.99, though you buy one of them and you get it for $13.56, and then buy 6 or more and you get it for $9.49. That's a pretty big vector. And so in every single wine in every major grocery store has this new configuration. And then what they'll do, they will offer this is my local Albertsons. The store will offer a 30% off on every single wine in the store. And what they're taking 30% off of is this price. They're selling below cost. Now, this is illegal in some states, and it's legal and others, and so on and so forth. So another part of compliance is making sure that any discounting, any pricing you use, some states require that you post a price and it's the same price in every store so that there's no competitive stuff and no dealing going on in the back room and all that kind of stuff. So the pricing calculator, you take your cost of goods that you establish for the winery, then you mark it up to create your FOB or ex-seller's price, and that's what you, the winery, the producer, is selling the wine for. You would usually use this also to transfer, this would be the transfer price to your tasting room or your wine club. We'll get into that a little bit later. The distributor then has to pay freight, insurance, and taxes. They receive the wine, so they come up with what's called their laid-in cost, which is their purchase price plus freight, insurance, and taxes. All right. Then they establish their markup and margin, and to create their selling price. And it may all be one price. It may be different for different size accounts. They may have different. But anyways, then you establish what is that MSRP. Then you go through the game of discounting that back down to arrive at what the selling price is. Okay. Now, you guys get to play for whoever. There's nothing to turn in on this, but we do have, when you go into spreadsheet server, go into auto filter and go up into the pricing, wine pricing workup calculator, and hit new. And this will give you an opportunity to kind of play around with what goes on with the pricing. So again, it's preloaded with examples. So what we have here is a cost per case that is the FOB or ex-seller's price. All right, so this is what the winery is selling the wine to the distributor. This is what the winery sells to an importer in another country that wants to bring the wine over or whatever, okay? And what we're also going to do is put a target MSRP in here of $29.99, but we're actually going to have this auto-generated as we make decisions. So you can see that our actual price is $31.92, but we want this to be selling on shelves for $29.99. So basically, you can increase or decrease your selling price, the FOB, and we can just run this down and find out, okay, given all the other inputs, if we wanted to sell this at $29.99, we'd need to be at about $168 a case. If you're going into a tasting room or wine club, it's really pretty easy. This is what your wine costs you, and you double it or more, and you come up with your selling price. So this is direct to consumer pricing. It's the easiest to do. But again, the best practice is the tasting room or the wine club operates their own P&L independently, and the wines come to them at the same price that the wine would be sold to a distributor, okay? Then you go through your US distribution. You've got a lot more things to take a look at and consider. Do you have a broker? If you're doing business, if we're just doing this for Utah, you have to have a broker. And that could be, a good broker might cost you 15%, okay? Now this is coming out of your pocket, all right? You're paying for the broker, but notice what it did to our retail price. Went up over $4 a bottle. You know, okay. So is there any workaround? Or would knowing what it takes to do business in that state just say, all right, we're not doing business in that state? So if you're not distributing in all 50 states, you can look at the tax basis, you can look at the demographics, you can look, do you like to go there to go on vacation or visit people and whatever, and then make your decision. But these are the kind of things that go in. If you're going for a national distribution, you might want to have an accommodation of like 4% of brokers' fees in here. And you're going to have to go back into your pricing now to rectify that to get us back down. So now we're at another $6 or $7 a case less, all right, in terms of what we can sell it for. Then how much does it cost for freight, insurance, and taxes? There's a lot more for Florida if you're a winery in Washington, a lot less if it's in Nevada, these kind of things. So this is a cost dollars per case. And then the distributor pays for this. You might help arrange it. You might offer discounting. So you might give somebody a little extra discount because they're the Florida market and you're not offering that discount to somebody in a closer state. So and that can range anywhere from $8 to $16. So it's pretty wide range. But notice if I go ahead and lower these costs, it is affecting selling prices and so forth. Are there any additional duties, taxes paid by the wholesale distributor? Any local taxes that you need to figure in the state of Georgia? These are where the gallonage taxes and sometimes the value taxes come in. So it might be a flat, you know, I think we looked in Florida and it was like $2.25, you know, and again, that's, I didn't do that. Come on. All right. So there you go. Then the distributor is going to have to mark it up. And don't forget, you've got to have a compelling sales proposition. You want the distributor to make as much money as possible, all right? And so you may do your own workup with the distributor not making a really good margin, and it gets your price down. But then how are you going to have them pay any attention to your product unless you've got a complete strategy that's not the strategy or marketing for the consumer, but is specifically for the distributor, okay? And that usually is, you know, how much are you going to support us? What's our margin in it? All these kind of stuff. Exports, very much the same with more for consolidation, freight, and taxes, typically higher taxes and duties. And then also more reliance on an importer, a broker, and those kind of additional fees, and whatever. So that's where that goes. And then finally, you get into the actual pricing. So if the restaurant's paying $20.42 and with no discounting from the distributor, and they're marking it up at 1.33%, that would be a 25% margin. That gets them to a $27.16 price. So you might put in it, if you know who you're selling into, you might say, you know what, we're going to make it so our wine will hit this $29.99 that we established, but we're going to have it so that we're going to go more specialty stores and whatever, and they're going to want a 50% markup. And we can maybe have them back off a little bit, or we can go back and change some of our numbers. With restaurants, understand what they're marking up the wines, what their requirements are. A lot of people bitch about restaurants marking wines up too high, but don't understand really what their overhead is, what their structure is, and that wine's one of the, on a margin basis, wine is one of the worst contributors to the bottom line of restaurants and hotels. And I did this work for a long, long time, and you just can't believe how stupid producers are about not understanding the business they're selling into it. You've got a gripe with them about the markup and whatever, then don't do business in that channel, frankly, really, because otherwise you're just going to get angry and you're going to get bad will created by your attitude and not understanding their business. Okay, so that's how this works, and that's fun to play around with. And then so again, just think about sales channel options. Think about it when you're looking at wines. How did it get here? What did it have to go through? What's going on in my state? Those kind of things, and that's what we can be doing for the next week and discussing. And this is where we can really share some. If you go into the store and see wacko pricing, we've got a chain grocery outlet. They've got a whole wine section that used to be all dedicated to closeouts. And just recently I went in, I bought a bunch of a beautiful label from a Napa Valley winery, a white blend, silk screened, absolutely gorgeous. $42.99 was the MSRP, and it was selling for $7.99. Who lost money on that one? And I'll tell you, it's not grocery outlet, and I tell you, it's not the distributor. So who's eating that? It actually might have been the distributor, but they'll never carry those wines again if they're closing them out at that kind of a level. The other thing you can do is find all these brands in there that are just bulk wine. They're virtual wineries, they're labels, and they're $5.99 or $3.99 Pinot Noirs and all this stuff, and they're purpose made just for these kind of stores. That was the opportunity. So they're doing bulk wines, they're putting labels on them, and labels that you might recognize from around the country. So kind of fun. All right. So that's what we got today. And let me stop the share. So any more questions? Okay. Tina, great to have you stalking us today. Thanks, Stephen. Great to have a face on here. And I'll get this processed and off we go into the next week. Thank you all.
Thank you.